Cool. All right. Well, we've had a busy week, man. We're kind of kicking full steam with what we've been doing every week. We had a newsletter go out, which was the second one we've sent in 2 weeks. That's going to be a thing that we do every 2 weeks, and I think people liked it. I like it because it's an easy way to keep up to date with all the work we're doing. We're doing YouTubes, we're doing our podcast, we're doing Build UI videos. We have a new series up. You publish your second episode of Server Components. So if folks are just interested in keeping tabs on that, that newsletter is a good place, a good way to do that.
Yeah, and with the newsletter, we include all of our premium content on Build UI, but we always make it free for the week that we send out the newsletter. So this is a way that you can watch our premium videos if you watch them right away. So there's nothing like one of my goals with this newsletter is I want everything to be clickable and
Yep.
consumable and not, oh, I click
You
a
don't hit
link
a
and you hit a
paywall.
paywall. Exactly, because that's like the worst. So
I agree. Yep. And with the amount that we're making and we plan on making, we ultimately want to get to a point where we do have some community courses, community resources on the site that are like permanently free. Right now, we're trying to sustain the work, and this is kind of a way to get the best of both worlds. So, yeah, that's been fun and excited to keep that going. We actually might have some course material. I think it would be cool for you to do some course material on kind of like the back end work you're going to be doing for that because, like you talked about in a previous episode, we're going to actually auto generate this from like our CMS using MJML, which is awesome because right now I'm making it by hand in ConvertKit and no email provider is kind of made or designed to be easy for developers to use for the kind of things that developers use it for. So, yeah,
yeah, absolutely. In fact, as I've been doing this work, I have the voice in the back of my head. It's, oh, what is a teachable lesson here? How does this
yep,
translate to a video?
yep,
We'll have a like a link to sign up to the newsletter in the description of this podcast.
definitely. Cool. Um, all right. Well, we have lots of things on our mind, but we thought that this episode might be fun to talk about this tweet that we saw from Dan Abramov and Jamie Kyle on Twitter. And they were talking about copy paste versus use of libraries and abstractions. And we thought this would be fun to talk about because not only is it related to the React APIs that they mentioned in this tweet, JSX, hooks, etc. It's also related to styling code and Tailwind, and I've been doing some Tailwind work on Build UI. So Jamie said a big part of the reason I like JSX slash hooks slash design systems slash Tailwind slash get text style strings is because of the cut and paste ability of them. Been working some major UI changes that require moving a lot of code. It's all the little things that you need to update that kills you. And Dan quoted this and he said, quote, design for copy paste, unquote, is one of the best principles I've learned in software. Better than solid or any what have you acronym. It seems trivial, but it combines deeply useful properties, safe or non-erroring removal, safe or non-conflicting duplication, and safe or non-splintered moving. So there's quite a lot here.
Yeah, I just want to say that I love the design for copy paste because that feels like it's a positive, it's an intention. So we've always said in the past, we say, what do we say? We say duplication is better than the wrong abstraction. That's like a principle we've tried to live by. But I didn't realize till I read this tweet that duplication is better than the wrong abstraction. Basically sounds like
It's defensive.
it's the lesser of two evils. They're
Yes.
both bad. You're making a concession in both, but this one is less worse than that one. And so it's like a negative. You're starting off on a negative, and this is like this is exciting. Design for copy paste. Like that's exciting. Like that's something I can build for. That's something I can design for. Rather than starting off and being defensive.
That's such a good point, man. And you know, thinking back to when we talked about our recipes and when we started those, and then back to how Tailwind UI launched its components, and then thinking back to D3, how I learned D3 10 years ago, all of that is designed for copy paste. And It's almost like when I first learned D3 using blocks, and there was tons of examples, and it was literally not only the most fun I've had learning a library, but also the most valuable resource in terms of documentation, compared to finding an API and reading the intention for using it. Examples, like that's another thing. Developers love examples. Everybody knows that. Whenever I go to MDN to look up, clip border box property that some person's using, I look at the table of contents on the sidebar and look for examples. And if there's a good one, like that's I'm going to understand it. And if there's not, I'm going to be like, now I have to read this paragraph, right?
I
So
can't believe you even look at the table of contents. I just start scrolling until I see a code block.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And everyone knows people do that on docs too. So, man, I think that's a really insightful point you made, which is that everyone knows developers love examples because it's just easier to understand. You're connecting it right away. That's like the language that we all speak. And there's not everyone loves examples, but then there's a jump there where we've learned these kind of ideas around object oriented design or design with functional languages or principles of good software design. And yeah, it's almost like you feel shameful for like duplicating things because of things like don't repeat yourself,
Yeah.
And so I should feel bad for repeating myself. Um, yeah, there's like a lot here because I love a good abstraction, and abstractions are extremely powerful, and like they're the only reason we're able to do the kinds of things we are today,
So I
with
think,
software.
yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's kind of the why you feel bad when you violate dry, don't repeat yourself, is that you've written code. And if you're repeating yourself, it doesn't fall into a good abstraction. Therefore, it's like, it's not good code. I don't love this. Like, I need to love this code. How do I love it? I need to find the good abstraction here.
Right. There is a good abstraction here. So let me ask you, do you think there's a tension between design for copy paste and building abstractions?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yes. I mean, my gut reaction, I guess I need to like think about this a little more, but
Mm-hmm.
my gut reaction is yeah, if I'm designing for copy paste and I just copy something 3 or 4 times, it makes me think it either needs to be abstracted behind something like behind a component or whatever, or I'm missing something. Like I'm missing something.
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah, I'm missing something. Like why did I copy this 4 times? Well, uh, the 4 different instances of the copy paste all have different like text inside the button, and so that's like the thing that I'm missing, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
I need to create the abstraction of a capital B button component that takes like its inner text, something like that.
Yeah. I,
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 I, I
I,
I guess I will say like the counter to this is every time I've jumped to an abstraction, a year later I look back and think, man, that would have been easier if it was just duplicated. Even if it was
yeah.
duplicated between apps or duplicated inside the same app, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I think we like clean and tidy things because we've all worked on like the legacy code base where it's just you can't ship anything, you can't make any progress because everything's messy. And so we always want to avoid that when we're writing code. We always want to tidy things up, make it clean, and we just I don't know, just I know I do this. Just jump to
Yeah.
abstractions.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a way to think about this that doesn't feel like the goal here is to write an abstraction. Because that's kind of what you're saying. You start duplicating things, and it's very easy to feel a pull or a nudge to say, I've got 4 buttons here, and one of them has like the wrong border radius or something. Like, obviously, there is like a button style button that I need to use everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then again, the problem is you go and you do like a sign up form or a contact sheet, and like you don't want the button to look like that, and so you've had the wrong abstraction. You need to extend it or allow it to be overridden. That's really tough, right? And I just wonder if there's a way to think about this that's like the goal is not to make an abstraction necessarily. The goal, maybe there is no abstraction. Like at any given moment in time, there's some common set across the duplication that could be abstracted, but that shouldn't necessarily be the goal because the thing's going to change, the app's going to change. And so it's like if you're using Legos, right? Imagine every time you build with Legos, you end up making like buildings or something at home. And you always have like four red squares connected by like four yellow long, like 2x4 pieces. And like that's just like everywhere, And so you're always duplicating that. Like, would it be better if that was like single piece in Lego so that you never had to like recreate that pattern over and over again? Like, when you're playing with Legos, you don't really think like that. I mean, like you have the smallest building blocks, which is the pieces they give you, but it's fine that you put them together,
I,
even if you repeat
I
patterns.
know, but with Legos, it's very clear that the thing that makes Lego so awesome is that I have the smallest building piece, and not only can I make the building with four red squares, I can make the building with four blue squares, and I can do
Right.
blue and red. But like you just intuitively see that right away. Where with code, I feel like you don't intuitively see that. The thing
But
you
I
intuitively see is the wrong thing.
Yeah, the one button that's going to work on every page in your site. I think because we do work with like low level abstractions, if you think about hooks and you think about like the state like the built-in React hooks and JSX, Tailwind utilities, those are all low level,
Yep.
and those are like the Lego blocks. And yeah, it's not the same thing as like coming up with some part of your app that's just going to stay the same forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really, I guess this is not like super, I haven't thought about this a lot, but I do think there's something here where, and I wanted another reason I wanted to talk about this because I wanted to relate it to like literally kind of our journey since we had started using Tailwind and writing like UIs in Ember until to what we do today. So I had a tweet out this week that was talking about a Tailwind video I put up on Build UI, and I was showing like once a component can be in like more than two states, like ternaries can become a little, hard to read. So you can just make sure you get the state of the component in a single variable, and then use like an object to define what classes should be for different states. And a lot of people were saying there's libraries for this sort of thing, which is fine, but um, I used to do the kinds of things that the library did, we did when we first used Tailwind, um, because it's very tempting to want to get rid of that sort of thing. And we jumped right to having like UI folder back in Ember Map when we first made it with like title, text. You're like, if I can just use a text component everywhere I have like text on the site, that's awesome because that's more semantically meaningful than a p tag, right? Because a p tag could be a lot of things, but
And I can update the
everywhere we
text.
have, yeah, exactly. Everywhere we have like content, like summary content for a video or messages, if it uses a text component, we've done that on consulting projects. We've had projects that have that sort of thing. And we just went right there. And I remember basically coming up with something in our Ember components that looked a lot like these libraries right away. And you could just add new variants and you can make them rounded and large and you could compose those together, compound variants or whatever, all that stuff. And it was like a pain in the ass to work with. Like it was just, and it didn't accommodate new pages. And every time you wanted to use something, you knew how to use Tailwind, you knew how to use Ember, but now I had to open up this UI component that I had built and understand why these four variants that were working together had colliding classes or right.
Yeah.
It was just an abstraction.
Right. And I want to acknowledge that it's a pain to work with when you're doing something new. It's a pain to work with when you're trying to add a style or use a button in a way that it's never been used before. They're great to work with when you're like copying the about us page into like the contact us page and it's all the same, which is
And
title, paragraph.
You want an H1 and you want the H1 to have all the typographic changes
Exactly.
across responsive screen sizes. Yep.
Exactly. And I think the mistake that we made with that stuff is we optimize for the same case.
Consistency.
Yeah, exactly. The consistency. And then as soon as we need to use it in a new situation, which by the way comes up like 3 days later. It's just so
Yeah,
funny how fast
exactly.
it comes up.
I know.
You hit that point where you start having to make concessions on the API you built like override props and just, you know, yeah. For me, it's always like, oh, I also want to pass in a class name to my design system
Right.
component, so I can
Right.
just get like the ultimate escape hatch. But then in that case, I haven't actually built the design system. I've built like base styles that are overrideable, and then I just
Yes.
go to town and I override everything, and then you can't do a mass update because now you have to go check every instance that Ryan overrode.
Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly right. So after kind of doing that for a long time with our Tailwind UI component, like with our projects that use Tailwind when we started using it many years ago, and then building these UI components, these days with something like Build UI, we are much more and just new projects in general, we are much more we prefer to leave the duplication in, maybe pull out a component once we have like a buy button or a button that we want to look the same in several places, use that where it's the same, but then maybe like if we have another button, we can just add it. So it's not like once you have a button, every button has to use the button component and it has to account for every use of it, which means it has to include async loading, state, and all that stuff. I've actually found, I think both of us have found uh, it's way better to just become more adept with using Tailwind and JSX and hooks and the low level things to get consistent design and become adept changing those things together than to try to come up with an abstraction for a UI component to enforce consistency. So, and I think that this is also true for like a lot of teams who work with it, because a lot of teams have more strict requirements than we do on a site like our own project, our own business, in terms of like enforcing, consistency in design. And so you have a designer who works with a design system, and they have the design team has a big commitment to like making sure every Airbnb button and panel and stuff look the same. And so they have this really big design system. But at the end of the day, developers, they go around that stuff, and your app could have, and this has happened to us. We've seen this also on projects we've worked with, both consulting teams. I mean, it's just this is just naturally what happens with design systems, especially if you don't have like a separate team who's like listening to new feature requests that the developers need and maintaining this thing, is that it just drifts and it doesn't match up with what the developers need. So the developers end up going around it in some way or another, right? If you, like you just said, if you have a button that's a UI component and you can override anything about that style, you're no longer rendering a button from your UI system. It's just something else. It's like a Franken button,
Yeah.
and it's the effect. It's the equivalent of exposing too big of a public interface. And all else equal, an abstraction with a smaller public interface is better because it doesn't expose as much information. It's easier for the implementer to change, all that good stuff. So, basically every time I've seen design systems used, there are times where it goes, you have to, the developers actually have to go around it.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe, kind of like, maybe what I'm thinking is better is for the design team to give you like design for copy paste. Here's like guidelines. Here's like how the button should look and feel. But like, we're not saying we've anticipated everything you're ever going to need. So it's better for the implementer, the front end developer, to become adept and be able to spot things like line height, tracking, right? All the design details. And a tool like Tailwind makes that easier than if you're just like completely alone to like have consistent text and typography and spacing, right? That feels like a level that's better to me to help the front end developers achieve their goal and also achieve consistent design. Because the bad abstractions, like the UI components everywhere, it's just an abstraction waiting to fall down, like you said, in a matter of days. And then it's even worse because now sometimes I have a button that matches what the designer wants, and then I have something that's just completely by myself. Whereas if I had been getting practice building an Acme button that adheres to the Acme style guidelines, I'm just better at doing that in new situations that I haven't anticipated once those come up, you know?
Yeah. It's worse. It's worse because you have a capital B button that's meant to be customizable by the design team, but the design team cannot customize it because the developers have gone around it and used it
Yes.
in ways. So it's
Yes.
like like the worst of both worlds. I,
Yes.
I do want to say, I do want to kind of push back here. More like kind of a question for you. So I hear what you're saying and I get it and I get excited because I feel like my like design chops and my CSS chops have greatly improved over the last few years since learning
Mm-hmm.
Tailwind. Like it is
Mm-hmm.
way better. I just get
Mm-hmm.
faster feedback. I can look at things like Tailwind UI, understand what they're doing, understand like the
Mm-hmm.
design fundamental and apply it to my code. But those are things like I'm interested in. Like I'm interested in that and I want to improve in
Yeah.
that area. I can imagine like working on a big team with someone that's a developer that just says, "Listen, I don't like CSS. I don't like design.
Right.
Uh, just
I
give me a
just give me
button.
the
Just give
component.
me a
Yeah.
button. I want to render a button." And then also kind of going back to how we started this conversation, like we love abstractions. You want a capital V button? Oh boy, I
Yeah.
can cook up the best capital V button you've ever had.
Tell the product owner it's going to be a few weeks for their next feature to get done
Yeah,
because I'm gonna go make a capital B button.
yeah.
That's a question though. Is like that's kind of where I think where I would push back on that now at least is your development team going to come up with abstractions like buttons and variant props that are better than HTML buttons and Tailwind classes?
No,
Ultimately,
no, no,
like
no, no.
are
They're
your
not.
backend engineers who don't have any interest in design, who are forced to use your design system components, actually going to be happier using them and end up with faster workflow and more consistent design than if they were using like a Tailwind
That they if they
setup with
learn
like limited
Tailwind.
tokens and they learn Tailwind, you
Yeah.
know? I think
That is a great question. I think their reaction is going to be, yes, I will be faster with whatever design system you build because I hate CSS. I've
But
worked,
what if
I've,
they had what if they had copy paste examples though? See, that's the other thing, which is what started this whole
yep,
conversation. We're talking about two options. One where you have like design guidelines visually, and it's your job to implement them with like, just Tailwind or CSS and HTML. That's hard. And then
yep.
you have the other system where it's like we give you UI components. But I think there's this thing in the middle, which has basically been our journey over the past few years, right? And it's like learning through refactoring UI and Tailwind and getting into more like the front end designer, arena and finding people, Rauno and, Alistair and all these people who are like, pay attention to all these details, right? And we picked up that. So now we can make a site that looks better than what we could have made 4 or 5 years ago. And the copy paste thing is like, maybe design for copy paste is just the easiest way to get that developer who's like not currently there up. And it's better than giving them a new abstraction that's going to be, that's going to fall apart. And it's better than telling them to go learn from scratch everything.
That's a
So
great,
it's like examples, that's kind
that's,
of like a middle
yeah,
ground.
it's a great answer and it's a great middle ground. And it's also something you can say, listen, I know you don't like CSS. I'm just like, I'm doing like a really bad like persona
No,
here, but
totally. Yeah.
someone that just hates, I've worked with developers that just, they
I
only want to do Times New Roman. It's just, they have like a lot of work to do and they don't want to go off and mess with like, how do I center a div? But
Yep.
anyway, that's a
Yep.
great middle ground. And you can say, listen, you don't have to write any CSS, but I'm not going to provide you an abstraction. Just copy and paste this.
Right.
And you can
Exactly.
say, like, listen, trust me, just try it for a few weeks. And if you don't like it, we can revisit it. But I think that's pretty good. I think I'm trying to put myself in like the shoes when I was doing more back end work. And I think that would be totally okay with me.
I think it'd be really cool for design teams to have their UI components, but instead of being something you install or link from an internal library and it has responsive props for 9 out of 10 props, but the 10th one you have doesn't have a responsive prop. And so, again, that's the kind of bad abstraction that is crippling for front end developers to work on. Instead, you say, I need like an article. Oh, we don't have an article UI component. Um, but the design team can give you a UI/article web page, and it's like a tail. It would look like something like Tailwind UI, right? Where it has, or MDN it's an example,
Hmm.
and the designer is calling out the important parts. When we have an article, we use this leading, and it's soft black text. So and you're just copy. I could just copy it in, and now I have the details that maybe someone who's not deep into CSS would know they would have, and but I can just copy it in. And so as a developer, it's so empowering, right? When you first use something like Tailwind UI or you start copying hooks or, it's empowering to hooks were super empowering
Hmm.
because I can copy a set interval or set timeout hook, use interval hook into my app, learn it, change it, right? I can copy a use measure hook because it's just so easy and change it to use layout effect instead of use effect if I wanted to block the first render. Like that's that's the kind of thing that a lot of developers love, I think. So I think it would be really interesting if I needed a button to be able to just look at a copy paste instead of importing it.
I,
Even on
I,
Build UI, we could do that.
yeah.
We have buttons, and there's like some inconsistency right now because we've been working on content and we just like launched it recently. It's almost like instead of having a capital B button because we do and we don't use it everywhere because it doesn't work everywhere because that's a really hard abstraction to get right. It'd be better if we just had a page maybe that just said, if your button is a link, it looks like this. If your button is a primary call to action, it looks like this. And I can just copy and paste it. And then every once in a while, we can like audit things or I don't know. It's just kind of,
We're looking
just
at the
kind of
site.
interesting
We're
thought.
looking at the site enough where if we see a button that's
Yeah,
off, we can
exactly.
just go in and tweak it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I really like this. Like you're definitely convincing me because I can copy your code, and if I need to just get something working, I don't have to understand it. I can just copy it. Maybe if I have time and I'm experimenting, I can also copy your code and I can look at it and I can say, oh, why did he do this? Let me tweak that. Let
Right.
me just delete that one line. How does it change?
Exactly.
It's really powerful. So it gives me the best of both worlds. It lets me learn when I want to learn, but it also lets me move fast when
Yep.
I don't want to write CSS. I just want to
Right.
use your thing you built. So yeah,
Right. Pretty cool. And I think it's pretty cool how going back to this tweet, design for copy paste is one of the best principles I've learned in software, better than solid or any what have you acronym. Safe removal, safe duplication, safe moving. All really good points that kind of really get at this idea of not having a rigid, it not being a commitment when you copy paste something. If I am building a whole new page and I'm going to be using your link component that's styled and it has like an invert variant and it has like a primary variant, and then I look at a design and it's a commitment because if I have gone through all this work to make the design work with that component and then I get one little part that doesn't, it's a huge bummer. Whereas if I copy paste something, it's not a commitment because, like you said, I can change it. And so I think that's really really cool. Um,
okay. I think my next sort of reaction or my next question here is like, okay, but like if we take this to like its conclusion, we know that some abstractions are good. Like I look at things like Rails and I love all the things that come in the framework that are just
yeah,
they're hidden abstractions and I wouldn't want to copy and paste those in my app. So I guess my question is like what makes I think my reaction to that would be if something is likely to change, it's better to copy and paste. Where if something is like
right,
well understood and it hasn't changed in 20 years, you can look at like the way we handle HTTP requests in
right,
a framework like Ruby and Rails is pretty consistent. It's pretty consistent across all frameworks, probably.
right.
So that's less likely to change, and therefore it can be abstracted. Like what do you think
Yeah,
about
I
that?
think I think if there's a tension here, if it's like a continuum, then it comes with experience. How and with our experience, both from consulting projects, things we've seen online, and our own work, that like the design system, abstracting like your design system layer, is just really really hard to get right, and it changes so much that even if you did get it right for a point in time, is going to change once you need something different in a new page. Part of the fun of the web is the flexibility. It's building blocks are very low level. HTML is like these little tags. It's not like you're working on a native app and using like Apple's UI kit that gives you like text nodes that have like very specific, right? It's just we can make whatever we want. Like you can hover a piece of text and scale it up. So that's always going to mean it's just more flexible. Whereas, when we do client side data fetching, we have like a use current user hook. Usually, from experience, you set up authentication on the app, and the way you authenticate the app doesn't really change that much once you set it up. And so, use current user is a good abstraction for a hook that we use like everywhere in our client side data fetching apps. And so, we're going to kind of jump to that before because we haven't been bit by it. I think with all this stuff, Jamie talked about JSX, hooks, design systems, Tailwind, all this stuff. Um, it's just a matter of experience, and you want to wait. You want to wait until it's painful, right?
Hmm.
And so if we got to a point where it was painful to change a button everywhere on the site, then it's like maybe how can we share that code? How can we reuse it? But especially for learning, design for copy paste is great. And I think it's interesting to think about the problem of consistent design from a design team getting implemented by a front end team as a problem of learning rather than a problem of the correct abstraction. You know?
Pretty good.
I mean, that's what our recipes page is all about. Like Build UI is about teaching techniques, right? That's like what we do. That's like we're trying to teach. Sometimes we'll come up with something cool or new, but it's not really like our purpose. Like our purpose is to teach. Like we see people come up with new things and show off new techniques and show off new libraries, and we break it down and make it easy to understand. The recipes with the copy paste is perfect for that because they're simplified down to the essentials of some technique, and it's a great way to learn. So maybe that's the takeaway, especially for these like UI systems, design system components. It seems like the main problem was one of learning, whereas when we started, we thought it was one of having the right abstraction. So that's kind of an interesting way to look at it.
I don't want to go in circles, but I guess I have the question of if I was on a design team or when I've worked with design teams, it's it's always we need to make it easier for our developers to be able to match our brand, and therefore we need to provide the button. It's never we need to make it easier for our developers to become like as good as us as designers. But you're
If you,
you're
but
you're arguing that, and you're
I
convincing me.
am,
You're completely convincing me
yeah.
that that is the answer. So
Like what if you look at the people who make like the websites and the web apps that are um, the most consistent or you know have the best like design. I don't know who like you think about Basecamp talking about how their front end developers do like design in HTML, right? There's not this handoff where there's a developer who's like, I don't do CSS or whatever, right?
hmm
You have to give that to me. Or probably people at Apple are probably, I'm thinking about and as a business owner, as a team building a product, would you rather have a developer who has a good design sense and is going to pay attention to the details like that, or just someone who's good at following an API? Of course, I think
but
at
that's
Airbnb.
not fair. Of course, I'd rather have the designer who's also a programmer, who's also a great writer. You know what I mean? But that
That's
like
true.
it's more you're in charge of a design system, and I
Yeah.
think your intuition is I need to make this easy to use so that
Bulletproof.
the goal here is so that like our brand and our styles are consistent. Bulletproof, yeah, that's great. So you kind of start off down this road of the capital B button. You never once think, or at least when I've been involved in these situations, I've never stop and think, oh, isn't the answer to just make our developers better designers? Like, but
Yeah.
that is like you've convinced
Yeah.
me that is, and you
It's
can
pretty.
do it.
Yeah.
You can do it without having to sit them down in front of Figma and teaching them all the what
Right.
makes a great design. You just make it copy and pasteable, and
Right.
they can
Right.
slowly absorb everything and learn it. But
Right. Right.
getting to know, getting on that path, it seems like a giant 180. Like you're driving this ship, design system
Mm-hmm.
ship. It seems like a really
Mm-hmm.
big change, and there's nothing. How would someone this is my question? How would someone that's in charge of designing a design system know that that's a path they should be taking?
Good question. I mean, one thing would be like if every you make a button, none of your programmers are using your button because it's not accounting for enough use cases, and they're getting frustrated and going around it all the time. And so there's not even point of you having a button there. Maybe you're trying to be too closed, and you're like, all right, let me know every time this button doesn't work. We'll add a new version, a new variant that accommodates that, and make sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes those are good conversations to have, but again, you need a lot of resources for something like that to make sense. And I think I know there's big companies that are super successful with design systems, but I also know there was some talk from Airbnb a few years ago talking about how they really pared it down to more composable Lego blocks because there's no way they could keep up with everything that people were building. So they had to go lower level. And so, yeah, I would say just taking the sum of our experience and both personal projects, consulting, a lot of times it would have been better than saying, oh, you can't render a button that's like inverted. There's no, we don't have that. All right, let's have that conversation. Let's add the prop. Let's make sure it works here, here, and here. It would be better to just, yeah, give a copy paste example and have the education be how you get that trust between the teams, you know? So it's tough. I haven't worked at like a massive company with like a huge design system where they've used it successfully. So I don't really know, but I'm sure there's some people out there who have. But if I consider all my experience and what people have said, on Twitter and stuff, it seems like, yeah, we're kind of going in circle.
Yeah, yeah,
It seems like they break down more often than people think. So it's just an interesting way to think about it.
It is. It is. I just, yeah, my gut reaction is always we need a better abstraction then and not. But
Yeah.
yes, you've convinced me. So
It'll be interesting to see where we end up with Build UI because we're adding some more pages now. We're taking an embarrassing amount of time, although it's good to ship things when you're embarrassed, just to have kind of the flesh of the site, the meat of the site fleshed out with the links between course overview and a course index page. We have our recipes page up, so I think we're going to want that consistency, and we have title treatments, and it'll be interesting to see where we end up in terms of what UI components we have compared to Ember Map, because obviously it's a similar site, and we repeat elements a lot. We have like header, like hero images, hero videos, and all sorts of stuff. So there's a lot of fun to have on a site like this. There's a lot of UI to play with, and so I just think it'll be interesting to see, given kind of how we just went all in, on the abstraction, and then it's like now we're on this design for copy paste train. I'll be interested to see where the site is in a year from now. What kind of abstractions we have there. So
it's good. I mean, I feel like I'm going to fight to not have it because of
yeah,
everything you just said.
yeah,
One thing that's interesting about this is hooks are easy to copy and paste, right? Like it's the examples you gave. Like hooks are just easy to copy and paste. The set timeout example is great. How do you know to design an API such that developers will write code that's easy to copy and paste, right? So was that like, was this a design intention of hooks? Hooks are easy to copy and paste. Therefore, it's like a road we want to go down. You get what I'm saying? There's us as app developers. We want to write code that's copy and pasteable for all the reasons you just said. So we can go do that. But there's like another level to this. The fact that hooks exist make it easy for us to write code that's copy and pasteable. So that's a design decision that went into hooks, knowing that it would result in developers like us.
absolutely.
So there's levels.
Absolutely.
There's levels here. So it's almost like
That's a great point.
there's a
And
meta
that's true.
point here
You're not really copying. You're not copying like Rails, like route stacks a lot of times and like pasting them into your app and changing them.
right. Rails APIs are Rails did not design APIs that are meant to be
Right.
copy and paste. They're
Right.
they're almost like they're designed to be like extended. You extend action,
Yep.
action model, action controller, all that stuff.
Yep.
So it's just interesting, like how
It's a meta point. You're right.
How do framework authors think in terms of, okay, I have two APIs, all else equal, I should pick the one that's going to lead to developers writing more copyable code that they can then share with their teammates.
I'll have to think about that. That is interesting.
Yeah, I don't know.
But it is funny that the libraries that we really love these days do that, right? D3 does that. Hooks do that. Tailwind does that.
Yeah.
It's like this kind of co-location, encapsulated. Just you can make a mess and then you can draw a boundary around it, right? Components, React components, same thing. So I definitely think there's some common thread there. That's an interesting point.
Cool.
Awesome. Why don't we go ahead and wrap it up this week, and we'll put a link to this tweet in the show notes because I think it's pretty cool. There's some cool conversation around it. I just put up a video on server actions. Maybe we can talk about that more next week when we have some more time to play with it. It's like an alpha feature. I like to stay away from the alpha stuff, but I was like, let's just try it out. Well, we were trying it out and we were pretty impressed with it. It was pretty awesome.
Come on over to the dark side, my friend.
Gosh.
Do you know what the
Before I
best
know it,
thing
I'm
is?
gonna-
It's abstractions on alpha features.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll throw the YouTube video link in for that one because that was fun. I just published that right before we started recording today, and yeah, we'll also add a link to the newsletter so folks can keep up with everything we're doing. We're gonna have that archive on our page on our website soon. Right now, it's gonna be like a link to ConvertKit, but that's gonna be fun to have the backlog, basically like as a blog on our site, almost like something like a change log to show everything we're working on. So. With that, I think that about wraps it up. Hope you have a good weekend or week or day whenever you listen to this. But thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
See ya.
Bye.